Prince Rhaegar Targaryen, the last Prince of Dragonstone, was the eldest son and heir to King Aerys II Targaryen, the Mad King. He was the older brother of Viserys and Daenerys Targaryen and the husband of Elia Martell, with whom he had 2 children, Rhaenys and Aegon. He also fathered Jon Snow with Lyanna Stark, whom he secretly married following an annulment from Elia. Prince Rhaegar Targaryen was the eldest son and heir of King Aerys II Targaryen, by his sister-wife Queen Rhaella Targaryen. For 3 centuries, the Targaryens had continued to incestuously marry brother to sister to keep the bloodline pure in the tradition of their Valyrian ancestors. Over time, this massive inbreeding led to a strain of insanity appearing in the Targaryen bloodline, culminating in Rhaegar's father, Aerys II, who is best remembered as the Mad King. Aerys II's reign began with great promise, but as the years passed, he slid deeper and deeper into insanity and paranoia. The shift was gradual, and he frequently recovered. By the time it became severe, Prince Rhaegar already showed such great promise as the future heir to the throne that most were willing to endure with Aerys's eccentricities, intending to wait out the remainder of his reign until Rhaegar succeeded him. Rhaegar was brave, kind, and wise, and most looked forward to the golden era that would assuredly begin when he would ascend to the throne. Greatly troubled by Aerys II's growing insanity, Rhaegar was torn between whether to act against him or not, but could not bring himself to turn against his own father. Like the rest of the realm, Rhaegar hoped to simply wait out the rest of his father's reign, and that his bouts of insanity would remain manageable by his courtiers. Rhaegar had good reason to think that the small council could keep the realm together despite his father's madness, as it was very capably led by Tywin Lannister, who served as Aerys's hand for nearly 20 years. Tywin was not only able to keep Aerys from tearing the realm apart, but managed royal affairs so well that he brought 2 decades of peace and plenty for Westeros, to the point that most people throughout the realm were unaware of the king's madness until the final years of his reign. Because Aerys and Rhaella had produced no daughters for Rhaegar to wed, he had to look outside the family for a bride. Many assumed that in reward for Tywin's long and distinguished service as Aerys's chief advisor, the bond between the Targaryens and Lannisters would eventually be solidified with a marriage alliance between Prince Rhaegar and Tywin's daughter Cersei, particularly Cersei herself, who for a time was quite infatuated with Rhaegar. 10. Yet Aerys surprisingly spurned the match, saying that Tywin was still just a servant and shouldn't try to elevate his family above its station, as such a match was beneath Rhaegar. It was later believed that Aerys did this in a fit of paranoia that Tywin was trying to usurp his throne. Despite everything Tywin had done for him in 2 decades of loyal service, Aerys had grown so resentful and fearful that many people throughout the realm whispered, accurately, that Tywin was the real power behind the throne by that point. Alienating his longtime hand, Aerys instead agreed to an arranged marriage between Rhaegar and Elia Martell, a princess from Dorne, daughter of the ruling princess of Dorne, who was a distant cousin of the royal line through intermarriage a century before. Rhaegar and Elia's marriage was happy according to all accounts. Oberyn Martell, Elia's younger brother, said that his sister loved her husband. Rhaegar and Elia had 2 children, a daughter named Rhaenys, and then a son named Aegon. That a few years later, the great tourney at Harrenhal was held and all the prominent lords of Westeros assembled. During the feast, Rhaegar played a song on his harp so beautiful and sorrowful that it moved even the wild she-wolf Lyanna Stark to tears. The exact events that happened in private are unknown, but the public events at the tourney's final joust are known to all. Rhaegar faced off against Ser Barristan Selmy in the final tilt, and won. Instead of then giving the victor's wreath to his own wife Elia Martell, however, the entire crowd of hundreds of people fell silent as he rode past her and gave it to Lyanna Stark, to name her as the tournament's Queen of Love and Beauty, an act that was doubly controversial as Lyanna was herself already betrothed to Robert Baratheon. At the same tourney, King Aerys announced that he was naming Jaime for years to succeed him as ruler of the Westerlands. While he was a very skilled swordsman, Aerys really appointed Jaime to the order to rob Tywin of his eldest son and heir, as the Kingsguard forswear all right to inherit his hand of the king, and treat him as a glorified political hostage at the royal court. Should Tywin ever turn against him, under as yet unknown circumstances, Rhaegar allegedly abducted Lyanna Stark. 6. Unknown to all, Lyanna had actually desired to leave with Rhaegar, and they ran off together to the Red Mountains of Dorne. They stayed at a relatively small castle Rhaegar named the Tower of Joy. Rhaegar arranged for the High Septon to grant him an annulment from his marriage to Elia Martell, 14, then personally officiate his secret marriage to Lyanna the same day that Lyanna's eldest brother Brandon then rode to King's Landing to demand the return of his sister and the death of Rhaegar, a rash thing to do according to others. King Aerys imprisoned him, and when their father Rhaegar went south to ransom his son, he was imprisoned as well. The Mad King then brutally executed both of them by burning Lord Rhaegar alive with wildfire in front of the Iron Throne and baiting Brandon into strangling himself to death in an effort to save his father. Afterwards, King Aerys demanded that Jon Arryn send him the heads of Eddard Stark and Robert Baratheon. Jon Arryn refused and instead raised his banners in revolt. Eddard Stark and Lyanna's betrothed, Robert Baratheon, joined him to overthrow the Targaryen dynasty. The conflict that resulted became known as Robert's Rebellion, or the War of the Usurper, to Targaryen loyalists. To the confusion of many, Rhaegar's location remained unknown during most of the war, which lasted about a year, as Robert Baratheon's rebel army fought its way up from Storm's End through the Reach and the Riverlands, and then up to the Trident. Rhaegar was nowhere to be seen. For months, it seems he stayed in seclusion with Lyanna at the Tower of Joy in Dorne. During this early phase of the rebellion, Aerys II continued to think of Robert Baratheon as just an outlaw lord, but after he defeated all of the local royal armies thrown at him and crossed north of the Trident, Aerys finally realized that this was the worst revolt the Targaryens had faced in over a century. Around the same time, Rhaegar suddenly returned to the royal court at King's Landing to lead the Crown's armies. Both sides now mobilized the full might of their forces. Robert led his rebel army south, composed of Baratheon, Stark, Tully, and Arryn forces, while Rhaegar led the royal army north to meet him, composed of the Targaryen armies raised from the Crownlands, supplemented by another 10,000 from Dorne. Accompanying Rhaegar were two of the King's Guard, Barristan Selmy and Elia Martell, uncle of Rhaegar's wife Elia. On the way, Rhaegar privately confided to Barristan that after they won, there would be many changes at the royal court upon his return, alluding that he intended to depose his father for his crimes and instability, and try to restore peace with the great houses of the realm. Rhaegar and Robert's forces finally clashed at the climactic Battle of the Trident, at the crossing of the King's Road over the river, not far from the inn at the crossroads. Rhaegar's army was fresh and slightly larger, but Robert's was more battle-hardened, and they slowly gained ground. Rhaegar and Robert spotted each other across the battlefield and rode out to fight, resulting in an epic duel which raged for hours as the battle dragged on around them. Robert killed Rhaegar with a mighty blow from his war hammer, which caved in Rhaegar's breastplate. His armor had been studded with red rubies, which were sent flying through the ford in the river. The landmark has been known as the Ruby Ford since. Their leader killed, the Targaryen army collapsed, and the rebels were victorious. With Rhaegar's death, the Targaryen cause was doomed. Most of their supporters had been fighting for Rhaegar, not the Mad King, so after he died most either surrendered or switched sides, not to mention that the main Targaryen army had been destroyed at the Trident. The rebel army continued unopposed south to King's Landing, but Tywin Lannister's army arrived there first. Tywin had kept the Lannisters neutral throughout most of the war, and only made the calculated decision to side with the rebels after it became obvious they would win, to curry favor with Robert and his allies after the war ended. Tywin feigned that he had brought his army to help Aerys in his time of greatest need, but as soon as they were let inside the gates of King's Landing, the Lannister army promptly began to brutally sack the entire city. Rhaegar's father the Mad King was himself killed by his own Kingsguard, Tywin's son Jaime Lannister, to stop him from enacting the wildfire plot to burn down the city. Meanwhile, Lannister soldiers gained entry into the Red Keep. Ser Gregor Clegane, known as the Mountain That Rides, cornered Rhaegar's wife Elia and her two small children in the royal apartments. Gregor killed Rhaenys and baby Aegon while their mother Elia watched helplessly, then raped Elia, before killing her too. Shortly before the sack, Rhaegar's heavily pregnant mother Queen Rhaella had been sent to safety on Dragonstone Island, along with his younger brother Viserys. Not long after they arrived, however, Rhaella died giving birth to Rhaegar's posthumous younger sister, Daenerys Targaryen. Viserys and his newborn sister then fled into exile in the Free Cities, across the narrow sea, before Robert's soldiers could arrive on the island. Lyanna Stark did not survive much longer than Rhaegar. After arriving at King's Landing in the aftermath of the city